That we had been only a day sooner. The battle was great. Your friends warred upon more Chronolta than the stars in the sky. They stacked them against the walls of the city and cut them down with their powerful fire lances. Had our relief force but been sooner, some might have survived. Woe, but we were too late, alas. However, they did break the power of the Chronolta, and for that Voitan was and is eternally grateful. It was because of that gratitude that we interred them here with our own honored dead, in hopes that someday others of their kind might come for them. And here you are. Same story, Jin said, turning back to the team leader. Where's the weapons? Where's the gear? Dara demanded. Unlike the Kamo Pukes, his toot was an off-the-shelf civilian model and couldn't handle the only translation program available. It was loaded with the local patois used around the distant starport, but handling multiple dialects was beyond its capability, and Jin's system couldn't cross-load the translation files. Some of that stuff should have survived, the team leader continued, and there were supposed to be more of them at the last city. Where'd the rest of them go? My illustrious leader asks about our dear friend's weapons and equipment, Jin said. The communications technician had had fairly extensive dealings with the natives, both back at the distant starport and on the hellish odyssey to this final resting place of the human castaways. And of them all, this one made him the most nervous. He'd almost rather be in the jungles again, which was saying a lot. Marduk was an incredibly hot, wet, and stable planet. The result was a nearly worldwide jungle filled with the most vicious predators in the known worlds, and it seemed that the search team, or assassination team, depending on how one viewed it, had run into all of them on its journey here. The starport's atmospheric puddle jumpers had flown them to the dry lakebed where the 4 combat shuttles had landed. There was no indication anywhere of what unit had flown those shuttles or where they had come from. All of them had been stripped of any information, and their computers purged. Just 4 Imperial assault shuttles, totally out of fuel, in the middle of 5,000 square kilometers of salt. There had, however, been a clear trail off the lakebed, leading up into the mountains. The search team had followed it, flying low, until it reached the lowland jungles. After that, it had just disappeared into the green hell. Dara's request to return to base at that point had been denied. It was unlikely, to say the very least, that the shuttle crews might survive to reach civilization. Even taking the local flora and fauna out of the equation, the landing site was on the far side of the planet from the starport, and unless they had brought along enough dietary supplements, they would starve to death long before they could make the trip. But unlikely or not, their fate had to be known. Not so much because anyone would ever ask or care about them, because if there was any shred of a possibility that they could reach the base or worse, get off the planet, they had to be eliminated. That consideration had been unstated, and it was also one of the reasons that the tech wasn't sure he would survive the mission. The official reason for the search was simply to rescue the survivors, but the composition of the team made it much more likely that the real reason was to eliminate a threat. Dara was the governor's official bully boy. Any minor problem that could be fixed with a little muscle or a discreetly disappearing body tended to get handed to the team leader. Otherwise, he was pretty useless, as demonstrated by his inability to see what was right in front of his eyes. The rest of the team was cut from the same cloth. All 14 of them, there had been 17 before the local fauna got a shot at them on the trek here, were from the locally hired guard force, and all were wanted on one planet or another. Aware that maintaining forces on Class 3 planets was difficult at best, the distant imperial capital allowed local governors wide latitude in the choice of personnel. Governor Brown had, by and large, hired what were still known as Schultzes, guards who could be trusted to see, do, and hear nothing. Still, there were those special occasions when a real problem cropped up, and to deal with those problems he had secured a special reaction force composed of what could graciously be called scum, if, of course, one wanted to insult scum. Jin was well aware that he was not an official member of the special force. As such, this mission might be a test for entry, and in many ways that could be a good thing. Unfortunately, even if it was an entry test, there was still one huge issue associated with the mission. It might involve fighting the Marines. He had several reasons, not the least of which was the likelihood of being blasted into plasma, to not want to fight Marines. But the mission had been angling steadily that way. Now, however, it seemed all his worry had been for naught. The last of the Marines had died here in this lonely outpost overrun by barbarians before their friendly, civilized supporters could arrive to save them. Sure they did, he thought, and snorted mentally. Either they wandered off and these guys are covering for them, or else the locals finish them off themselves and are graciously willing to give these Kranolta the credit. The only problem at this point is figuring out which. Alas, the local said yet again. He seemed remarkably fond of that word, Jin thought cynically, as Targ gestured in the direction of the distant jungle somewhere outside the tomb. The Kranolta took all their equipment with them. There was nothing left for us to give to their friends, that is, to you. And you can believe as much or as little of that as you like, Jin thought. But the answer left a glaring hole he had to plug, and hope his efforts never came to light. The scummy says the barbs threw all the gear into the river, he mistranslated. Poth, Dara snarled. That means it's all trashed. And we can't trace the power packs. Even trashed, we could have gotten something for them. What an imbecile, Jin thought. Dara must have been hiding behind the door when brains were given out. When a body is looted, the looters very rarely take every scrap of clothing. Nor was that the only peculiarity. There was one clinging bit of skin on the corpse before him which had clearly been cut away in an oval, as if to remove a tattoo after the person was dead. And there were no weapons or even bits of weapons anywhere in sight. For that matter, the entire battle site had been meticulously picked over to remove every trace of evidence. Some of the scars from plasma gunfire had even been covered up. The barbarians, according to the locals' timeline, could not possibly have swept the battlefield that well, no matter how addicted to trophy-taking they might be, before the civilized locals arrived to finish driving them off. The last city they'd passed through had also been remarkably reticent about the actions the objects of the search team's curiosity had taken on their way through. The crews of the downed shuttles had apparently swept into town, destroyed and looted a selected few of the local great houses, and then swept out again just as rapidly, according to the local king, and the very few nobles they'd been permitted to question, at least. And in that town, the search team had been followed everywhere by a large enough contingent of guards to make attempts to question anyone else, contraindicated. All of that proved one thing to Jin, and it took a sadistic, snot-filled idiot like Dara not to see it. The bodies had been sterilized. Somebody wanted to make damn sure no one could determine who these Marines had been without a DNA database. The dead Marines' toots were already a dead issue, of course. Their built-in nanites had obediently reduced them to half-crumbled wreckage once their owners were dead. That was a routine security measure, but the rest of this definitely went far beyond routine, which meant these particular people were something other than standard Marines. Either raiders or something else. And since the locals were covering for them so assiduously, it was glaringly obvious that all of them hadn't died. All of which meant that there was a short company, from the number of shuttles Jin had put their initial force at a company, of an Imperial Special Operations Unit out there wandering in the jungle. And the only reason